And Christine, are we good to go?
Yes, we are.
All right. I will let you take over admitting folks. Hey, folks, for those of you that don't know me, I am Nate McGaha, and I am the executive director of Arts North Carolina. And I'm really excited to have everyone here for this webinar, which we have entitled "What the Federal is Happening." This has been a rough month, a couple of months, in terms of just a whole lot of changes happening, particularly at the federal government, and it's a lot to process. But whether or not you are an independent artist or someone who's running or working in an arts organization, nonprofit or for profit. There's been a lot of changes in the landscape and the law. And really, at Arts North Carolina, we've been focused on how this is impacting the arts and specifically the cultural agencies. So, um, we did have a little fun with the title. So this might not be our first What the Federal webinar. I am crazy enough to put my name, title, and email and cell phone number right there on the slides. The slides will be made available after on the website under our Arts and C webinars. So feel free to use those as needed. Um, you know, so often I hear folks in webinars that say I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. And guys, I am not a lawyer. So definitely do not construe anything that is being said on this webinar as legal advice. I'm gathering information and I'm sharing it, and hopefully able to provide some context. But legal advice is for lawyers, particularly your lawyers. So today I want to talk a little bit about maybe an approach to making decisions right now, and to kind of get us to set the stage for the conversation, and then also then to dive into the information and the things we know. The executive directors earlier in the administration, what's going on with the Institute of Museum and Library Services, what's going on at the NEA, particularly around DEI and gender ideology, and what that means. Federal works of art and their oversight, to the massive changes happening at the Kennedy Center. This is a little aside. We're going to talk about federal tax policy, not because it's directly related to what the Trump administration is doing, but it is really important and it is happening this year. And then we can talk a little bit about the possible impacts we might see in North Carolina, and some sage advice I've received. And then hopefully we're going to have some time left over at the end for some questions and discussion, and hopefully all of this will be put into context. So moving on, making decisions right now is hard, particularly when it pertains to all of these executive orders. And I think that the very first thing that we can do is stay informed. And I know that's hard because a lot of the information is not, it can be overwhelming and upsetting, and there's so much of it. But it's good to find a source that you can trust, like Arts North Carolina, I hope. And remember that the information that is coming out of some of the executive orders is intentionally vague and unclear, and also executive memos and actions. But remember that it is better to have some information than no information. And also be really aware of the difference between when somebody is talking about what they know and what they think. And I think that's really important because you can interpret a lot of things from vague language, and that might drive decisions, and that might not necessarily be your best course of action. I think, and this goes for nonprofits, but also for personals, right? Review your mission, your vision, and your values. Um, what is your purpose? Where are you trying to go? And what are the values that you hold dear as you get as you're going along the way? I think it's really important to hold on to those as you're being faced with some of these big picture questions happening right now. Also, make sure you're assessing the situation and your risks, right? So what are all of my options for taking action, and what is the outcome if I make this decision or that decision, right? A lot of what we're going to be talking about today is federal funding, right? Like if I don't want to do, if I choose not to, if I don't want to do X, then I won't receive federal funding. Why? And is that a risk that I'm willing to take, right? So I think it's really important that you assess all of the situations, even maybe some of the ones that are less desirable, just so you have all your cards on the table. And the last thing I want to mention, and this is something that I'm starting to see a lot of, is are you complying in advance? And this is just kind of checking yourself. Are you making a choice before anybody has asked you to make a choice, because you're avoiding every possible consequence? And I know, as somebody that, I before I was executive director of Arts Court in North Carolina, I was executive director of a large ballet company. And, I would definitely always try and choose, like, get whatever information I could and choose the safest course of action with the lowest risk. But in this particular moment, you may risk overreacting and compromising your values. And so I will, to put that into context, I recently heard a story about a state arts agency. I have not been able to verify it yet, so I don't want to say what state, that canceled, that based on executive orders, particularly the one about DEI, which we will talk about next, um, canceled funding to a for a Harriet Tubman mural. Now, they're obviously, and there was the mural was accessible to everyone. It certainly was not in any way violating the executive order, at least based on the information I have. But out of an abundance of caution, Harriet Tubman worked for, the abolition of slavery. That might be considered DEI. Let's not fund that project. And then what that does is turn into, racial censorship, and that's absolutely not the direction that we want to head. So just be careful about complying in advance with executive orders, and thinking through all those options. Now, the early executive orders, we had a whole flood of them come in the first few days as President Trump took office. One of the first executive orders was a sweeping executive order that basically did away with a large number of the executive orders that had been put in place by President Biden. One of those had formed the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities back in 2024. Now, for a little context, the President's Committee for Arts and Humanities had been around for a while. When President Trump first took office in 2017, all of the members of that committee resigned in protest to his presidency, and there was a lot of resignations and protests going on. But the Trump administration did not take kindly to that embarrassment. So instead of reappointing new members, he simply issued an executive order that disbanded and ended the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities. So certainly, coming back at it, this was a priority to get taken care of on day one, because he wanted to make sure that whoever was on that committee at the time would not have the opportunity to resign in protest again. So the committee was immediately disbanded. Another one that came out on January 20th, and we're going to talk a good bit about this, defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. That is the name of the executive order. So what it really boils down to is the federal government is only going to recognize two genders, and they're leaning heavily into an identifiable trait, right? Not something that you identify yourself, but something that, like on your driver's license, male, female goes along with blue eyes, blonde hair, etc. And they're saying that the federal government is only going to recognize male and female. And they're also working towards making sure that that kind of ties back to designation at birth. It says that federal dollars cannot be used to fund gender ideology. And so, what does that mean? There is a definition for gender ideology, but basically, it's talking about anything that is other than male or female, or discussion of anyone who is male transitioning to female or vice versa. And it also rescinded a whole host of rules and guidance and executive orders that had addressed transgender individuals, and how the federal government should be approaching that situation. So everything that it had the power to do, it just sort of erased from the federal government and declared that there should only be male and female, and that federal dollars cannot fund gender ideology. Um, Another one that has that a lot of folks have talked about, and I know has a big impact on the arts, is the DEI executive order. Also, the official title is Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity. So it does say that federal grantees must certify that they don't engage in illegal DEI practices. And we're going to keep having that conversation as well as we move through this, about when the word illegal DEI is used and when it is not used, because I think it's a really important distinction. A lot of the work that's being done by the administration around this specifically has to do with workplace policies, as well as hiring policies and opportunities such as college admissions. So it is, I think it's really important to keep the context of that, about when we're talking about DEI, whether or not we're talking about something that has been called illegal DEI or something not. Again, this is one of those instances where the administration has been vague. It does end all federal programs that have anything to do with DEI, any DEI training, DEI departments, etc., and also says that it will cut funding to any colleges that have DEI programs. And you obviously have already heard colleges across the country are closing their DEI offices. A lot of them were already doing that in the prior year, before the election. And finally, it does direct the federal agencies to work towards ending DEI programs in the private sector, and specifically looking to large businesses and nonprofits, going after the much larger ones first. I think it's 500 million and larger, and to see whether or not their DEI programs in the private sector are breaking the law. And there are DEI programs that do run afoul from time to time of the Civil Rights Act and others. So and finally, and this was an executive order that came out on January 3rd, and actually kind of seemed to maybe be a good sign in the moment. And it was an executive order that established a task force to plan the celebrations for America's 250th birthday, the signing of the Declaration of Independence coming up in 2026. This was actually almost identical to a committee that was formed by executive order of all the same agencies back in the Obama administration, in that final year. And it did include the NEA, the NEH, which is the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, as well as the Institute for Museum and Library Services, were on that task force. And we felt like, okay, great. So if we're listing them in a task force, it probably means that we're not going to cut these agencies, up until about a week and a half ago. So now that we talked about those early executive orders, back on March 14th, like I said, about a week and a half ago, a new executive order came out titled Continuing the Reduction of the Federal Bureaucracy. And this one directed that 7 federal agencies, which included the Institute of Museum and Library Services, needed to drastically downsize. And in that was also the U.S. Agency for Global Media, Voice of America. So that has always been, for decades now, radio broadcasting organization operating all over the world, kind of uplifting democracy and American ideals. For those of you that are familiar with that. Um, and museum and library services, I mean, they are exactly what they think. They give, millions of dollars in grants every year to museums and libraries, and including art museums, history museums, etc. So they help out museums and libraries in all 50 states, as well as all of the territories. And so what this said was that the idea was that non-statutory components and functions of the following governmental entities shall be eliminated to the maximum extent consistent with applicable law. And what that means is many of these federal agencies are actually created by Congress. And so there is a law that is passed that creates this federal agency, and that law says this agency needs to do X. So what this executive order said is, basically, because Congress created the agency, the administration cannot fully get rid of the agency. Only Congress can do that. But what they can do is scale it back so that it is the bare minimum that is required by the law that created it or any other applicable law about that agency. So only those things that the agency is legally obligated to do is now what there is the how they're shifting the Museum of Library, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS. Those reports were due March 21st. So they had 7 days to turn in these reports, to talk about which components or functions of that entity, if any, are statutorily required and to what extent, so that this work could begin. I will say that the two organizations that obviously took action on this was American Alliance of Museums, as well as the American Library Association. So those links are there. There's actually a call to action on the first page of our website that will take you to the email generated by the American Alliance of Museums, so you can reach out to Congress. I will caution that both of these actions are going to Congress, and there is really, we don't know what Congress can do in this moment, but this is who we always have a conversation with, is writing to our congressional representatives so that they are aware. Normally there's a very specific action, but Congress actually just allocated funding for for IMLS, and now, even though that funding's been allocated, this is happening at IMLS. So what happened this week at IMLS? Well, the first thing was that Keith Sonderling, who is also the deputy secretary of labor over at the Labor Department, was sworn in as acting director of the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And there's been some pushback about this because, as I understand it, and I'm not sure whether or not it's law or policy, but either the director of museums or the director of libraries is supposed to serve as the acting director if there is no chair or director of the institute. But that is not what happened. They swore in an acting director. And then very quickly, the Department of Government Efficiency has tried to move in. I will say that haven't seen any news articles. So that clip you see right there is coming off of Reddit in Fed News. And that kind of, there's been so much sweeping change across the government that, quite frankly, the news media can't keep up. They can't have somebody at every agency understanding what's going on. And so outlets like Reddit, where government employees, this particularly one, goes on after this clip to basically, asking anybody from the media to come and report on what is happening at IMLS. So that's a lot of the way we're getting information, because so much is happening. I do also want to note that Shelley Lowe, who was the director of the National Endowment for the Humanities, was also asked by President Trump recently to step down. Now, I will say that generally happens when new administrations take over. What generally happens is one of two things: either that chair of the agency or head of that agency will resign, and then make complete space for the new administration to appoint someone new. That is what happened with NEA Chair Jackson. She resigned and left shortly after the inauguration. But many other directors will stay in place until they're replaced by somebody, and to take over. The person that was named to serve as the acting chair or the acting director was actually the head of legal from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So that's what's going on with that. But we do have a situation where now all of what we call the cultural agencies, NEA, NEH, and IMLS, are not led by official appointees, but are led by acting chairs. Now, Marianne Carter is actually not called an acting chair. She's being called a senior advisor right now. If that name is familiar to you, she was the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts from 2019 to 2021 during the first Trump administration. She has a great rapport with NEA staff, as well as having worked closely with folks from National Assembly of State Arts Agencies and other national arts organizations. So it's actually good to have a familiar face here because there was no learning curve as Marianne Carter came in as senior advisor. One of the very first things they did was ended a separate, what was called a Challenge America grant. And this was really targeting low income areas and rural areas, I mean, both rural and urban communities. It was a smaller grant for $10,000. They redirected those funds into grants for arts projects, which is a much larger category. And so anyone that was applying for that Challenge America grant rolled is now eligible to apply for grants for arts projects, and they actually may be able to get more money from that. But it's just really streamlining the operation of the NEA. Also, and I've heard speculation to basically say that they were worried that maybe Challenge America grants may be seen to run afoul of some of the executive orders, and so it was better to roll it into a larger program and allow those projects to be funded than to worry about whether or not that funding would be cut. So better to repurpose the funding and make sure those folks can be served. But again, that is speculation, and I really want to point out the things I know versus the rumors I hear. Also, they stated that America is going to give preference to America 250 projects, which is, part of, because they are part of the task force. That does not mean in any way, shape, or form that they are only funding projects that are for America 250 or have a 250 component. They're completely funding other projects. They made that clear, but they did say that this is a preference that they would really like to see in the coming year. And this is really where some of the bigger stuff is. They made additions to their grants application assurance of compliance. Now, the assurance of compliance has been around forever. And if you have ever received an NEA grant, you have signed off that you are going to comply with a whole lot of federal laws, not the least of which being the Civil Rights Act. And so this is not new by any stretch of the imagination, but what was added to the assurance of compliance was specifically the executive orders and the laws that they touched on. And so there were 3 points to really point out, or four. The applicant will comply with all applicable executive orders while the award is being administered. The applicant's compliance in all respect with applicable federal anti-discrimination laws is material to the U.S. government's payment decision pursuant to Executive Order 14173, ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. Also, the applicant will not operate any programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, otherwise known as DEI, that violate any applicable federal anti-discrimination law. Again, really important. And the applicant understands that federal funds shall not be used to promote gender ideology pursuant to executive order defending women from gender ideology extremism, restoring biological truth. So, how does the NEA boil that down? So they did, as they often do, a webinar before their grants were due. This was back on February 18th, so a little over a month ago. And they did sort of split up this issue. And I know a lot of folks have like tons of questions, like tell me more, tell me more, tell me more. But I think like it is in this moment, like let's this is the information that they wanted to highlight. And number one is the assurance of compliance is not new. Everybody's got to sign it. It's been happening for decades. Number two, in accordance with executive orders, they will not fund DEI projects, right? Now, they did not go out of their way to put the word illegal there. So I think that message, again, my opinion, is that they don't mean illegal DEI activities. They mean all diversity, equity, and inclusion activities that they're going to stay away from. Um, but again, what you put on your application is your own choice. Applicants must certify that they do not operate any programs promoting DEI that violate any anti discrimination laws, including programs outside of the scope of their NEA project. And so, very clear distinction here about they're not funding any DEI activities, but their grantees cannot have any illegal DEI or DEI that violates anti discrimination law. And so that is DEI or DEI, NEA staff and lawyers that are interpreting these executive orders. And this is the information that they have put out thus far. Also, they are still reviewing how these executive orders apply to open awards. Those have already been reflected. And to my knowledge, I don't have any updates on that, and I'm not sure that any exist. I will say that in this same webinar that they did, they also said that the NEA likes to support certain focus areas, and the things that they list are HBCUs, tribal colleges and universities, American Indian and Alaskan Native Tribe, Hispanic serving institutions, Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. So, people with disabilities. I think that it's really important to note that they did not stop all of these things. They did not pull this as a focus area and say that you cannot do work with HBCUs, that you cannot. And actually, they went to the point to say we're happy if you want to focus on, for example, work with an HBCU. And then, of course, obviously, things that support health and well-being in communities through the arts and supporting and new technology centered around creative practices, really kind of work with awareness and understanding of AI. So that's where we were about a month ago. But then there's been some news recently since then that I want to catch everybody up on. Before we dive back into assurance of compliance, let's talk about the NEA's budget as well as the NEH's budget and the budget for IMLS for that matter. Congress passed an extension of pretty much all the current spending from for FY25, which is the fiscal year that we are currently in, but they had not approved a budget for that ends on September 30th of this year. So that's fiscal 25. They basically, the vast majority, with a few minor exceptions, is just going to extend that funding all the way through September 30th. So whatever was funded in, so NEA and NEH, which were 270 million to 207 million in FY23 and FY24, will continue to be at 207 million each in FY25. We are hearing, so what about the FY26 budget? Usually the president's budget kind of kicks that off. And we're now hearing that we shouldn't expect it until maybe as late as mid-May. That is late for the process to begin. And I will certainly say that in terms of what we are expecting, this we could be talking about cuts. And so if we're talking about government cuts across the board, we'll certainly be asking to not be cut worse than anyone else, right? But I would definitely say that this is not going to be a year where you're going to see a lot of funding increases within the federal government. So back to where the NEA is with their applications. Grants for arts projects for round one, which is the stuff that's happening now. Part two, which is where you have to sign the assurance of compliance, is now due April 7th because they've made some changes. It was March 24th, now it's April 7th. So, what were those changes? What's been happening? Well, that DEI executive order that we've been talking about so much, there was a court injunction that came out, kind of stopping its implementation, and the NEA changed what it said on their assurance of compliance. It said that they would not ask applicants to certify that they were in compliance with that particular DEI executive order while the injunction was in effect. The appeals court lifted the injunction about a week and a half ago, but the language has not changed as of today. Now, what the language does say is while the injunction is in effect, and the injunction is no longer in effect, but it's kind of hard to say until April 7th as to whether or not what's going to be included on that assurance of compliance. So, definitely something that we're keeping an eye out for. I will also say that one of the groups that I participate in is called the Cultural Advocacy Group. It's made up of some state leaders and a lot of national leaders of advocacy from arts organizations, everybody from Americans to the Arts to League of American Orchestras, Dance USA, Opera USA, etc. And Marianne Carter is going to be speaking to us on April 4th. So hopefully we'll get some more answers to a lot of these questions. But just moving forward, and I'll certainly make sure that Arts NC is providing you what information we can. And then there was another lawsuit. Now, this was an injunction. This is a lawsuit that was filed by the Rhode Island ACLU against the NEA, specifically about the gender ideology comment or clause of the assurance of compliance. Basically saying that it violated two constitutional amendments and current law. Saying that it restricts artistic expression and imposes a viewpoint based on viewpoint-based discrimination, violates the Fifth Amendment due process by imposing vague and arbitrary restrictions, and also breaks the Administrative Procedures Act because it arbitrarily changes grant eligibility requirements without proper public notice or comment. So ACLU actually filed this for several arts organizations: Rhode Island Latino Arts, the Theater Offensive, National Queer Theater, and Theater Communications Group. In reaction to this, on March 10th, the NEA updated their assurance of compliance again to say that they would not ask the applicants to certify compliance with gender ideology executive order pending the outcome of litigation, and that litigation is ongoing. So I know that's a lot of information to consider as you're thinking about your applications for your NEA grants, but that is what we know to date. And as of today, this is where the assurance of compliance stands as of the recording of this webinar. Moving on from this, kind of a few other hits to things that are affecting the arts at the federal level. Currently, more than 26,000 government-owned art objects, some of which date back all the way to the 1850s. Many of them, and I mean a lot of them, were created in the WPA era, are currently unstewarded. Nearly half of the 40 employees that work for the GSA, which is the Government Service Administration, that were devoted to artistic and historic preservation, have been dismissed from their positions pending termination. So at least 5 of the GSA regional offices have been closed. And just so you understand who that is, Since 1975, the Art and Architecture Program, which is what the GSA division that looks after these artworks, has operated as a commissioning body for the federal government, devoting a 0.5% of federal construction costs to art commissions. Right, so the federal government has been in the business of commissioning and buying artwork for a long time. And this puts a major damper in that. I will say that it nothing has been done to necessarily completely eliminate, but they have lost half their employees, and there's a lot of questions that artworks that were in the middle of contracts are being moved, etc., about how that's moving forward. Washington Post was the first to do it, was to report on this. The link there is from the art newspaper, which is not paywall protected. So I am kind of trying to drop a few links in these slides as well. What's going on with the Kennedy Center? So back on February 12th, the Trump administration dismissed pretty much the entirety of the board of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and they appointed folks that were in the administration, and particularly Donald Trump's personal sphere, to the Kennedy Center board. And then very rapidly, they named President Trump as the chair of the Kennedy Center board of directors. One of the very first actions that board took after naming President Trump chair was to terminate the contract of the current Kennedy Center president. And also, in response to this, a lot of protests. Ben Folds and Renee Fleming, who were both advisors to the Kennedy Center, or in Ben Folds' case, the National Symphony Orchestra, which is under the Kennedy Center, resigned in protest. Also, you may have heard about Hamilton canceled their tour coming to the Center for the Performing Arts in the last several weeks. So there's a lot of hubbub about who is and who's not performing at the Kennedy Center. And then just a few weeks ago, on March 17th, President Trump came for the first Kennedy Center board meeting that he was going to preside over as chairman. And one of the first things they did was pass a new resolution that gave President Trump the power to appoint and dismiss the panelists that decide Kennedy Center Honors Awards. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, the Kennedy Center Honors are probably one of the highest American honors that an artist can receive. And usually go to folks who have huge amount of artistic accomplishment. Everything from I know, I worked closely with Patricia McBride, who was a diva, a ballet star, principal dancer at New York City Ballet before becoming associate director of the Charlotte Ballet. And she's had won one of those. And I think Tom Hanks was also in that same year. So there's just broad stretch of artists from popular to classical, et cetera, honored by these awards. Not only did Trump say that he's going to have more control over who gets the awards, he suggested, and we're not sure whether or not he was joking, that maybe he should host the award show in order to get the ratings up. Trump also talked about the fact that he felt the building needed some updating, and that he made a statement that the columns that surround the Kennedy Center, which are metal beams, that they were originally supposed to be finished with marble that goes all the way around them. No one has been able to find any proof that that's true. But he apparently wants to make some changes to the physical appearance of the Kennedy Center, and he said the programming is definitely going to improve, to use his words, and that the Kennedy Center would no longer be having woke programming. So that is sort of what is going on with the Kennedy Center. They're in Foggy Bottom, and then I want to shift in before our discussion to talk a little bit about federal tax legislation. First question, why am I talking about federal tax legislation on this webinar? For those of you that may not know, the tax cuts that that were passed in 2017 and took effect on January 1st of 2018. I believe it was called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and is often just referred to as the Trump tax cuts. Those are up for renewal in 2025. So in order to keep tax cuts, the Republicans that currently control both houses of Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, need to act to renew tax legislation. And the thing about when tax legislation gets renewed is that it opens up the tax code and allows an opportunity to change it. And so there are two pieces of legislation that we have been working on for years, and that we're hopeful to be mindful. The first is the Charitable Act. And so basically in 2017, when those tax cuts doubled the standard deduction, that disincentivized everybody from writing off donations as well. So 90% of tax filers are taking the standard deductions and are not itemizing the charitable deductions that they make. What this bill would do, if it were to become law, was allow up to $4,600 for individuals, and $9,200 for couples filing jointly. This bill has, I think this is the third time that we've seen it come up. It was originally became a problem back in 2018, and we have seen giving, particularly small gifts, small to medium gifts, uh, progressing downward. And actually, in North Carolina, the Secretary of State was talking about the fact that recently that we saw year over year a 50% drop in charitable giving across all nonprofits. So there is a sign-on letter if you want to grab the slides and use that link at the National Council of Nonprofits to show your support or your organization's support for this for fixing this the issue and getting that above the line deduction. Currently, I know in the Senate that Senator Budd is a one of the sponsors, one of the co-sponsors of this. And right now in the House, Senator Davis, or Representative Davis, rather, is a co-sponsor. And we're going to work make sure that a few more House members come on as well. We've also been having conversations about the Charitable Act with Senator Tillis, because we've been talking to him a lot about tax policy. And so with the Performing Arts Tax Parity Act. So what this does is it sets the adjusted gross income to $100,000 or $200,000 limit for performing artists to be able to write off expenses, headshots, travel to auditions, all these personal expenses, to write that off on their taxes. That has been at $16,000 since 1986. That's the Reagan administration. So obviously, that needs to be adjusted and brought into the 21st century. I mean, or even into the 90s. But so this is real common sense legislation. The House bill got filed back in January. Senator Tillis is one of the two primary sponsors. Was last year for the Senate bill and will be again. We just got confirmation from Senator Tillis's office that they are going to be that legislation is getting filed again in this Congress this week. Just so that you guys are aware, Arts North Carolina partnered with the folks at Actors Equity, specifically to reach out to all of you amazing organizations that employ performing artists and support this, to sign a letter both back in 2024 and this year. And last year we had 29 organizations this sign on. This year, 56 organizations signed on. And it just so happened we submitted that to Senator Tillis, and 4 days later we got an email saying that they would be introducing that this week. Does one have anything to do with the other? I don't know, but I think that advocacy is working here. So we're really excited. Senator Tillis also, his position on the Finance Committee actually puts him in place to have a real impact on tax policy. So his support of this particular bill is really important. So we will keep you updated on the tax legislation and let you know when advocacy action might be needed. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about state arts agencies. By the way, I put the Arts Council logo just so that you know who your state arts agency is. But these thoughts actually came from David Holland, who I'm going to talk about a little bit more, who's the deputy director out at Creative West. So please do not think that this means that this is what the North Carolina Arts Council thinks happened. This is a perfect example of speculation. What could happen because of all these ideas, of all of this legislation, all of this federal government change? Um, there could be some funding fluctuations. Shifts in federal policy could affect state allocations and partnership agreements. So certainly, if there's less money from the NEA, then if that budget goes down, right now the North Carolina Arts Council gets about $1.2 million based on the size of the state, but that is based on 40% of the NEA's budget goes to states and territories and regional arts agencies. So if the overall budget goes down, the 40% that goes to states goes down, and that 1.2 million that the North Carolina Arts Council gets is going to shrink. What do they do with that 1.2 million? They grant it to organizations and artists across North Carolina. So there could be some direct impacts through the North Carolina Arts Council through funding specifically, but also those partnership agreements. And so, what is a partnership agreement? It is more or less the contract between the state arts agency, like North Carolina Arts Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts. And it also has an insurance of compliance component. So, some big questions right now about what that means for if federal dollars come through the North Carolina Arts Council and then are subgranted out. What do those subgranted granted individuals, what is their need for compliance with federal with the executive orders? Or also, is there any possible side effect if the North Carolina Arts Council receives federal funds? What the state dollars that they administer, does that impact it at all? Which I don't think is nearly as likely or very likely at all. However, these are the questions that we're continuing to ask the federal government. There are no answers. There is no active advocacy right now that can be done to change the outcome on this. But I do want you to be aware that these are the things that are happening. There could be legislative challenges that come down the pike, and we're already starting to see this. Federal environment could increase political pressures to embolden further restrictions. We are, just doing an analysis this weekend on a DEI bill that's moving through the state legislature, focusing primarily on almost entirely on employment practices. But I will also say that another bill just got filed specifically around gender ideology, and so we are already seeing in North Carolina some legislation, keeping in mind that there is not a supermajority in the House. So there is if Republicans were going to pass a piece of legislation like this, they would need all of the Republicans in the House plus one. There is a Republican supermajority in the Senate. But as of right now, all of these DEI policies or gender ideology policies are Republican only. There are no Democrats signed on to them. Opportunities. This could lead to state policies that to figure out new ways to manage this, new mechanisms for funding, not necessarily just for state arts agencies, but for all of us to find out new ways within state government. Maybe I've been inspired to see the North Carolina Arts Council working with the Department of Commerce on Helene recovery and how to make that happen. I think that we could see even more interdepartmental partnerships. Also, a lot of state arts agencies out there are using America 250 as a way to as an opportunity for state arts agencies to do their work. So there's some opportunities there, and case studies, and certainly, right now there are a lot of states that are not used to operating in this environment, and North Carolina is not one of them. We've had our HB2s, we've had this type of legislation passed before. We've been in a had a legislature that was a Republican majority. So we're kind of used to some of this thinking and some of these policies, as well as other Republican states. A lot of Democratic states are looking to us to kind of build that model, but we're also looking to other Republican states to kind of see what, as these policies are enacted, how is the best way to continue our work and to support our work in a mission and value centered way. If you want to know more about what's going on in the federal government, I am really excited that we are going to have some incredible talent and brain trust at Arts Day on April 27th at the McKimmon Conference Center at NC State in Raleigh. I know that we're not going to be advocating on April 23rd like we typically are, and that advocacy is going to happen at home or via Zoom with your captains. But we've got Pam Bro coming from the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. She's going to talk about disaster relief in addition to that national landscape, and an amazing speaker, and has been a leader in the arts and national arts scene for years. But she's going to be speaking of disaster relief because she was actually in Louisiana in the Arts Council there during Katrina, and has a lot of insights into what that long-term recovery might look like for Western North Carolina. And also David Holland, who's Deputy Director of Creative West, which is the regional arts council for the entire western part of the country. And he is also a co-chair of the Creative States Coalition, as am I recently, just became a co-chair of the Creative States Coalition. And this is the organization of all of the state level and regional level, as well as local level advocacy organizations across the United States. And we're certainly having this conversation, not just what's going on at the federal government, but what does that impact look like at the state level? I'm really excited that I have David, as well as Claire, who is the Claire Rice, who's the CEO of Arts Alliance Illinois, to work through this with, and as all of us Creative State Coalition partners move forward. And lastly, before I open it up for questions, some advice from sociologist Jennifer Walters, which I think is, something that I found kind of helpful as I moved through all of these changes. One, pick 2 to 3 issues you deeply care about and focus your attention there. You can't do everything, and that is by design. It's very intentional with this flooding of the zone, as it's been called. Impact comes from sustained focus, not from scattered awareness of everything. Use aggregators and experts, trusted analysis, who do the heavy lifting and synthesis, looking for the patterns, not just event after event after event. Arts North Carolina is trying to be the aggregator and the expert for the arts, particularly the arts in North Carolina. And we're looking to other aggregators and experts for how this is impacting the arts at the federal level. So there are a lot of people that are watching, and Arts North Carolina just wants to make sure that you're getting that information as quickly as you can. Remember that feeling overwhelmed by all of this is exactly the point. When you recognize that this effort is trying to overwhelm you, you take a little bit of power back. So take some breaks, think this through, pause, and remember that we're kind of bracing for a lot of changes in federal government over the next few years. And we're not going to fix this. You're not going to have all the answers in the next few weeks or months. So pace yourself. Practice going slow. And I love this. The urgent clouds the important. So, there's a new headline. It seems like every day. Initial reporting on things that happen often misses the context about why they're happening or the larger implications of that. So be really careful about reacting immediately when news comes through, and take some time to consider them and build community. Share that load, and have different people tracking different issues. Because really that's sort of the whole idea, is that there's a lot of this is happening across many different issue areas. And so Arts for North Carolina is playing its role by being informative to the arts community here in North Carolina, by gathering as much information as we need and finding the best ways to move forward. And Arts North Carolina, at least I have no desire to make a statement on every single executive order, because not only would it take up all of my time, but it would also then take away my power and ability to have conversations with legislators at the North Carolina General Assembly, as well as our congressional representatives. Arts North Carolina is going to continue to stay focused on our most art specific issues, in terms of both information and informing all of you, as well as advocacy. So I think we've got 5 minutes left, but I'm happy to have this go a little long if you guys can stick around. And any of the things we've discussed or any other questions, I would be happy to answer. Just keeping in mind, of course, that I am not a lawyer and I am certainly not your lawyer. So, yeah, I'll open it up for questions. Do we have anything in the chat, Christine? Doesn't look like it.
Two thank yous.
I love the thank yous. Um, any other questions? So good to see so many familiar names and a few unfamiliar names.
No
I noticed.
questions, but this has just been really helpful to kind of distill everything into what we need to know.
Excellent. Thank you, Eileen. Yeah, like I said, this will probably not be the first What the Federal webinar. I'm patting myself on the back because I thought the name was cute. Hopefully, it doesn't upset anyone. But we're happy to continue this conversation. I'll also be trying to get more blog posts up. It's been difficult because I also serve the role of doing these slides, doing these updates for the Creative States Coalition. And honestly, it's changing so fast that it's hard to get a blog post out before the information has changed. So I think there was an answer about the recording. Once we get the subtitles and everything fixed so that everything is fully accessible, this will be posted on our Arts NC webinars page. And we are in the process right now, I believe, of broadcasting this on Facebook. So I think that means that it will be immediately available on our Facebook page as well. So yes, so you can check it at any time. Recording. Someone loves the name. Good. Anything else? Thank you. You guys are all so sweet.
There's somebody that asked a question about H418.
Yes. Right. So H418 is almost identical to the bill that we introduced 2 years ago. So for those of you that don't know, H418 is a North Carolina bill, and filed by Representative Carney as well as Representative Kyle Hall, and who are our Arts Caucus chairs, and Representative Paré from Wake County, Representative Hall and Paré Republican, Carney Democrat. What the bill does is it requires every K-5 public school to provide K-5 students with instruction in performing and visual art. Now, 2 years ago, it was music and visual art. We've changed the language so that it could be met that performing would be possible to met by theater or dance, though we think it is highly likely because 95% of students are already meeting this requirement with having both music and visual art. So it probably would be music and visual art in elementary school. However, there are still 5% of students that are not enrolled in either one or the other of those. And there is one county where there are no students enrolled in music or visual art at all. So what this bill would do would require instruction in both performing and visual art to happen in a normal classroom size of students by a certified instructor in the in that subject at least once every 5 instructional days for no more than 30 minutes. So 19 out of 20 kids are already doing it, right? But we want to make sure that we can help out the kids that are that are not having that chance. I will say, so we sent out a call to action on that bill. It was filed last week, and so the call to action went out yesterday. It is on the website. It is on the blog post that is right on the front of our website, or you can choose to go straight to the Action Center if you want. It is editable. I will say that we have a new email system, so you may need to put your put different information in again, but most of it should have been transferred over. And you can edit that message to your. It's a slightly different message to the House and the Senate, but we encourage everybody to reach out so that they understand the need for this in the at the legislature. I hope that answered the question. And it will be on our agenda that will be available for folks to use for their advocacy work in the next few weeks. Great. And just lots of people that are thankful. And I am so grateful to have all of you and so glad that so many folks showed up. Please spread the word and feel free to share the links to the video so that we can continue this conversation and hopefully there won't be too many changes. We won't need to do this in a week, but I imagine that we'll probably be doing another webinar with updates in the next several weeks or months. So keep an eye out and stay tuned to your email for more action alerts to support the arts. Thank you all so much. You all have a wonderful day.